Good afternoon, Daryl. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. I've been looking forward to it.
Likewise, it's such a treat to have a chance to chat with you. I've been very much looking forward to this myself. And really, I just had a few questions for you. I know your body of work in change management and change leadership is extensive. And so we'll just zoom in on a few key areas to explore today, if that's okay.
Sure.
Excellent. So I thought I would start off by something that has always struck me in your work, that through Connor Partners, you do a lot of work in terms of helping sponsors and change agents in change execution. And it seems that that's more the nomenclature that you use as opposed to the more traditionally used expression of change management. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. For me, there's some important distinctions between the two, and yet there's some integration as well. And I would start with where are they each best suited? And I think that change management is best suited for tactical, more incremental changes. Change execution, strategy execution is much more at the enterprise level, much more for transformational work. But as you can see, even with just that distinction, change management would still fold underneath strategy execution. But the reverse is not necessarily true.
Right.
The points of application, change management tends to be more methodology centric. So the practitioners are more focused on concepts and tools and techniques. Strategy execution uses that, but it tends to be less linear, more about principles and frameworks and guidelines. The scope is different. Usually change management, oftentimes anyway, it's about single projects, where strategy execution is really about more enterprise-wide portfolio, multiple projects, and how their overlapping impact is coming in. Many times the success metrics are different. With change management, it tends to gravitate toward what I'll refer to as installation measurements. How many people did we train? Things like that. Strategy execution, since it has a higher altitude, if you will, in terms of visibility with the senior leaders, they're much more interested in realization metrics. So yes, I'm glad we trained that many people. Did we actually change the relationship to our customer? Because that's what that change was all about, that kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
The focus tends to be different. Change management is oftentimes focused around targets, as it should be. Strategy execution, of course, deals with targets, but puts a real strong emphasis on preparing senior leaders for their role. And maybe the last distinction for me is just, I would say, just approach. Change management, its approach is usually focused around training and communications and things of that nature. Strategy execution includes all that, but moves toward shifting mindsets, not just behaviors. Creating deep understanding, commitment, and alignment in those mindsets. So, in no way for me is as I begin to think about and apply my work, moving to its reference as strategy execution, it wasn't as a pejorative for change management as much as we needed a broader, higher altitude scope in order to have a relationship with the CEO and the board. Change management tends to have a relationship with HR or a leader, but oftentimes not at the enterprise level. So
Yes.
that's what it was about for me.
That is very, very helpful, because I've always been struck by that. And I think it's really useful the way you explain that the reverse is not true, that some of the components of change management, yes, you would find in execution, but not in the other direction. And now if we continue down this path of a certain nomenclature and concepts that you use, of course, you are perhaps best known for having coined this expression, the burning platform, which probably is used in all kinds of different ways, which may or may not be what you had originally intended. So I thought it really would be terrific if we could hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak, in terms of really what you were intending in that core idea.
Well, so I began the research for our work in 1974. And at the time, there was not that much documentation about whether patterns exist for success and failure. And one of the early patterns I found was this very differentiating level of resolve that senior levels were displaying when change was successful versus when it wasn't. And I'm always looking for a metaphor rather than present research findings. I'm looking for stories or metaphors to convey the research findings.
Right.
So we had the finding, and I couldn't find a metaphor anywhere. And I literally, just happenstance, I was watching TV. This is 1988. I was watching TV when this news account came on of the burning platform story, and I won't go through the whole story. That'll take up too much time. But what I was struck with was that at the heart of the story was this individual saying that he made the decision to jump, not because he thought it was a cool idea. He was scared to death. But why? So if you take the metaphor as leaping into a fearful unknown, which is what
right.
Why would you do that? And it's because for him, as scary as the change was, the status quo had become more scary.
Exactly.
So staying on the platform was more frightening than this terribly risky jump. And I thought, wait a second, that's what we're hearing from the leaders. And this is always the interesting twist. The metaphor comes from a disaster, but I'm using it about a characteristic of success. Leaders that are really associated with successful change are the ones that have this incredible resolve to even get over their fear of what could happen if this doesn't go well. And one of the things that I have to be careful about is that a lot of people have misunderstood that the story is about you have to be in trouble or you can't change. Not at all. You have to no longer accept the status quo as realistic. That's what the resolve's about. So it's not about crisis. It's about the status quo will no longer serve us. Now, that could be because of a current or anticipated problem or a current or anticipated opportunity. It can go either way. And oftentimes it's a combination of that. But some configuration of current or anticipated problem or opportunity has led the leaders to believe that as scary as this transformation may be, it is the best alternative. And so their commitment to it was deep.
Mm-hmm.
Without that commitment, what I saw with those that weren't succeeding is they were just as enthusiastic at the beginning of the project, but when the project got more difficult, and they all do, when they ran out of resources or whatever, they tended to step back to the status quo.
Yes.
Whereas these leaders continued on despite what they ran into, and that's really what the metaphor's about.
Yes, that's so beautifully put in, and to me is very much connected to your idea that you want people trapped between fear and hope, that
fear and hope.
Staying on the platform is no longer viable.
Yeah, exactly.
So well put. Terrific. And then in your more recent work, I know that you've been extremely passionate and an absolute thought leader in exploring the idea of the change agent as being the agent of change, him or herself. That is, that the practitioner, the way that they show up and the way in which they engage with their sponsors and their stakeholders is in and of itself the main instrument of change. And so I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that concept and what the key thinking is behind that.
Sure. Well, over the years, my view just evolved to the point where, going back in the early days, 70s and 80s, I felt like that how I could contribute to the profession, well, it wasn't even a profession yet, but how I could contribute to this thinking was to create methodology, tools and techniques. And so I spent many years doing that. And at a certain point, I started realizing that two different practitioners that I had trained in some methodology or technique, they had become equally proficient in that tool, but one was having a radically different level of impact than the other. And I that became something I saw fairly often. And so I got curious, what's that about? And that's when it got clear for me that, there's two parts to our work. There's what we do, tools and techniques, methodology, and there's who we are, how we show up. And so the label I gave the who we are part was it's our character and our presence that has this impact. Think of character as the core truth inside you. So if I was going to really tell the client what's really going on, and I didn't back off to protect the engagement or not to hurt anybody's feelings, if I actually told them what was happening, that comes from what I'm calling your character.
Right.
Presence is the way you convey that to the client. So the client can't see your character, but they get this, think of a bubble forms around you and the client. That's the presence that you create. Well, who we are, I think, is a combination of this character and presence. But here's the problem professionally. We have become so consumed with certifying ourselves, licensing ourselves with tools and methodology, which, by the way, I totally think we should. So there's nothing wrong with that. But we haven't given much space to who we are. So my concern is that as a profession, we're moving toward cranking out technicians rather than artists.
Yes.
The artistry of this profession is a combination of being exceptionally good at your methodology. You have to. That's the starting point, and then. If it's just a job, maybe that's as far as you have to go. If you're interested in mastery of this craft, then you have to start exploring not just what's the right tool to use, but who am I and what's my relationship to the client as I use that tool. And so as much as out of frustration as anything else, my partner at Boswell and I, we launched Connor Academy about 4 years ago so that there would be a place for the seasoned practitioners that were solid in their methodology, but they were ready to move into how do I use myself as an instrument, not just the tools and techniques. And so that's where all of the work around character and presence has evolved.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that I had a great pleasure being exposed to your work and in participating in your Raise Your Game program, which I just can't recommend highly enough. And I recall at that session at Atlanta last year, a participant we were chatting over lunch about some of these certifications and tools that are available out there. And she had such a terrific comment and had said, well, now I have, a box full of tools, but I'm not really sure how to build a deck, and it might be a little bit dangerous if I try. And I think to me, that's it. It's sort of the tacit knowledge and that experiential component that you bring to bear that really I'm not aware of any other source for really honing that craft and that art form as you described.
Here's what's at the heart of it for me. Either change management really does have value to provide, or it doesn't. It's all smoke and mirrors. If it does have real value, and we actually can make a difference with this practice in whether or not changes that could have a positive effect on humanity, get implemented well. If what we're doing is important, then the second question is, well, am I good at it?
Yeah.
Because if it's important, and I'm good at it, then I actually have an obligation to develop myself as far as I can. If I'm not particularly good at this, or it's just a job anyway, then that's different. But if what we're doing is important, and we feel like that we're good at it, then that opens up the door to develop mastery.
In terms of this concept, Daryl, that we were just talking about mastery. What is your suggestion in terms of where practitioners can go, or what might be some first steps in exploring this idea of moving into that state of mastery in terms of character and presence?
Well, step one is to get solidly, deeply grounded in some methodology. Doesn't matter which one, or some combination, or build your own. That doesn't matter. But that's step number one. Then when it is relevant to start thinking of yourself as an instrument, not just your tools and techniques, most people historically in our profession have gone outside the profession. They've gone to a coaching program, or they've gone to some of them to counseling programs, or advanced degrees, because you kind of had to go step into another discipline and then bring it back. Well, to me, those are still good options. I mean, my original profession before change work was in clinical psychology. So I'm really an advocate for incorporating what we can from other disciplines. I also believe as a professional community, we owe it to ourselves to provide as much of this as possible to ourselves. And there are some exceptions. There are places to go, I think, within the community that at least touch on this. Unfortunately, I don't think that we have as much of a focus as we'd like. And that's why the academy was set up, is because the academy doesn't even accept anybody unless they already are solidly grounded in methodology, because we don't touch methodology at all. It's all about one or two things: either character and presence, which is how I use myself as an intervention, or how do I form the relationship with senior officers where I can become a trusted advisor?
Yes.
Those are, to me, those are focuses that you attend to after you're solidly grounded in your methodology. So, of course, there's there's books and podcasts and all that stuff, but counseling programs, training programs, many people have gone out to coaching programs. The better ones, in my opinion, the better ones have, particularly in the coaching profession, they have a nice balance, much better balance than I think than we do in our profession. The really good coaching certifications, they are actually taking you through both what to do and who you are.
Yeah.
Our profession has, and I'll be honest with you, I think I just see it as a phase we're going through, right? I mean, I was there when we were born, so I just see everything as developmental phases. I think that we got very insecure for a while. Nobody knew what change management was, and did we even have any, were we real or not? And so I think legitimately so, many decided we need to have a stamp of approval so people can, and we need to have some acceptance criteria and all that, and which I think is wonderful. The trouble is it's time to not leave that phase, but to evolve from that phase into a phase where we carry deep methodology certification into more advanced work about who we are there, because the client, if particularly transformational change, if the work is incremental, that's different. If it's transformational work, then our profession should be providing not just proficient technicians, but solidly grounded practitioners that also were grounded in who they are, and could bring forward a level of directness and honesty that can only come out of confidence of knowing who you are and knowing how that produces value.
That is so beautifully put, Daryl. And this explains why there is only one Daryl Connor, because I think that is such a valuable and insightful way to look at the profession, and just unlocks a whole new level of potential. So I am so grateful, certainly in my own instance, to have had an opportunity to learn some of those teachings in your program, but also for you to take the time to offer it to our program at the University of Ottawa, and to our other partners with the results map.